The Captain, the first Fatui Harbinger, and the pinnacle of human strength. Let's talk about him because although I love where his story is going and we got a ton of lore about him, his backstory, and some inner workings, there's also something not quite adding up here. There's some inconsistencies and definitely some secrets. But as I've been researching Khaenri'ah's history, I've been learning a lot, and there are quite a few possibilities as to who the captain actually is, and who he's connected to. Because make no mistake, he is not just some run-of-the-mill lieutenant, but he is an important figure within Khaenri'ah. Make no mistake about it. Malika said herself that if the captain was in his prime, there's a good chance that they would be evenly matched. There is no way that there's just a ton of Khaenri'ahns walking around back 500 years ago that possess this level of power and strength, and this level of honor. One of this guy's soldiers that followed him to battle and died literally tried to come back from the dead to serve him again. I'm telling you, the captain is no joke, and he can clearly use powers that are not on the elemental chart of Genshin Impact and Teyvat, his constellations that are the three pikes or three nails. Some more biblical references within Genshin, the three nails representing salvation, redemption, but also, more than anything, suffering. The captain literally says this when confronting Malika for the first time. The captain is the first Fatui Harbinger for a reason, but there's something different about him from the other pure-blooded Khaenri'ahns. And what exactly is his connection with death? I want to go over all of these topics in this video, so let's go over what we actually know from what he told us, different references we know for sure, and then we will build off that, because I do feel that Khaenri'ah's history paints a picture on not only who he could potentially be, but who he's associated with, and the different references within Khaenri'ah in general in its history. Because much like Arlecchino, who was very linked and associated with Fontaine but was always Khaenri'ahn, the captain is very similar, so let's go over it. So Khaenri'ah had to fight a war on two fronts during the Cataclysm. Khaenri'ah sorta betrayed itself. This is important because Khaenri'ah was labeled as the bad guys during the Cataclysm, rightfully so, through the perspective of the other nations because the casualties were massive. We got a tiny little taste of it during 5.1. When we had to fight the war in Natlan, all the death that we saw just with that conflict with the Abyss. This was in every single nation, with massive monsters like Durin and Elia. The Five Sinners brought this to Teyvat. The Archons had to respond, and even 3 Archons were butchered. The regular Khaenri'ahns that did not provoke this cataclysm had to feel the wrath of the heavenly principles, the Archons, but also the Abyss. The captain was in the middle of that, fighting for his life with all he commanded, but when the battle was lost, the Abyss was too much. They fled to Natlan with all of the survivors he could bring, and he continued to fight the war there because Natlan was also heavily targeted by the Abyss, because it's the nation with the most damaged ley lines. This is where he met the chief of the Masters of the Nightwind, befriended them, and he fought alongside them through many battles, until the chief met his fate. But he told the captain about the Gnosis and a potential solution. This is why the captain tried to take the Gnosis in 5.0. Even though 500 years later he's no longer in his prime and is much more whittled down, he's still incredibly strong and tried to take the Gnosis to save Natlan the only way he thought to do so. He was not collecting it for the Cryo Archon, at least not for the time being. Malika then states that she would have recognized him if he fought 500 years ago, but he states, "The flesh rots, even though I have the curse of immortality." That is the first red flag we'll circle back to. He then says his power is a shell of what it once was. Malika then states, "I would have never known during our battle, it felt like I was fighting against the pinnacle of human strength." But he says, "Oh, I still lost and I deserve no praise. It's a shame we never got to face off 500 years ago. You could have seen what I was truly capable of." And Malika, the Pyro Archon, says, "I agree. If we fought then, I'd also have been more motivated to go all out." Then Paimon says, "Neither of you were using your full strength." And Malika states, "I say we are evenly matched if we face off again. Victory will come down to who wants it more. So at full strength, it would be a close bout." Paimon asked if he knows Dainsleif. He obviously does, and asked if we met him already. During the Age of Khaenri'ah, he only knew him by name. The last time he saw him in person, he was traveling with our Abyss sibling. He obviously knows our Abyss sibling as well. He also doesn't know how Dainsleif managed to slow the deterioration of his body. He's also aware that we are the sibling of the prince, and given his role he held in Khaenri'ah, he would prefer not to harm us. So he obviously has respect, knows who Dainsleif is, and must have obviously had some kind of connection with Piero. Piero also being aware of the captain, seen as that he's the first harbinger and probably the first recruited. Piero would have known firsthand what Capitano is capable of. Then finally the captain visits the Lord of Night, where the Lord of Night is surprised on how he's able to know all these secrets about death and the rules of Natlan as an outlander. The Pyro Archon used to strike back the Abyss came from the ruler of death. From what I know of her rules, she will demand death in return. The ruler of death sent you on your long journey. Natlan still has a final battle to fight, and I too have a final foe to face. For the sake of those countless lost souls, and for Natlan's future, I need your help, and that is where the quest ends. So let's break it down now. The captain's constellation, which goes perfectly in hand with what the captain states, that he had to flee his homeland and was unable to save or prevent the situation from escalating. He is by far the most honorable individual we've met in the game. He takes this burden heavily, much heavier than your just run-of-the-mill platoon captain would. And although I never once thought he was a dragon, I can see why a lot of people had that theory, because most of Khaenri'ah has some subtle draconic-like features and references. This goes a lot with this nation, which we are going to get into in a bit, but I would even suggest it's more of a serpent reference than anything. Ring any bells? Again, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now what I find really weird right off the bat is his flesh rotting. If he's a pure-blooded Khaenri'an, why are all the other pure-blooded Khaenri'ans maintaining their form? Dainsleif is not the only one we meet. I don't believe Kaya to be cursed, but Clothar and Piero were, and Piero looks fine from what we can see. At least at first glance, he does have half a mask covering half his face, but his flesh is clearly not rotting away like the captain because he's fully covered head to toe. This can literally only mean a few things. Either all of the other Khaenri'ans found a way to slow this deterioration of their body, or the captain is cursed a bit different. This would either have to do with his origin or his deal with death. Now this is the part of the video where we have to look into Khaenri'ah, because Khaenri'ah is heavily based off Nordic mythology, with Teyvat having the Great World Tree, Irminsul, the King of Khaenri'ah being King Irmin, obviously a reference to Odin, but it also has a lot of Germanic references and inspiration. It really does hit home when you look at the Cataclysm, because Khaenri'ah was a victim of itself. This is actually a really deep reference to World War II, because the citizens in Germany were also a victim of the war and their own nation, a lot like the 5 sinners in the regular Khaenri'ans. Even innocent Khaenri'ans paid the price from not only the sinners and the Abyss in general, but also the 7 nations, the Archons, and the Heavenly Principles themselves. A lot of innocent Khaenri'ans died on both sides, and were a victim of not only themselves but the heavens, even if they were innocent bystanders. It was a subterranean nation, and had 2 ruling dynasties, the Crimson Moon, and then later the Eclipse Dynasty, both obviously references to lunar events, which is no coincidence that we see a broken, shattered moon beyond the false sky. Khaenri'ah has been trying to defy this world's fate for quite some time. As we see Arlecchino glitching, we do not know much about the Crimson Moon Dynasty or even exactly when it took place in ancient times, but according to legend, a sage of this era suggested that the then ruler organize and establish to house children who come from beyond this world. Hope that one such child would have great enough power to transcend the gods, and they housed Khaenri'an orphans from all walks of life, with an outlander named Paranere Arlecchino, we're obviously aware, is a descendant of the Crimson Moon dynasty and inherited those powers, which is the source of her Bale Moon Bloodfire. But what's interesting is during this era, there was a handful of renowned warriors and ancient heroes of Khaenri'ah, one of them being a man named Albric. We don't know anything other than that, but this is probably the origin of the Albric clan. Whether they came from another nation originally as an orphan, through that organization, or beyond Teyvat like the organization founded in the first place, we're not sure. But one other thing interesting about the Crimson Moon dynasty is they specialized in alchemy and creating life, like Rifthounds, the monsters, a science, or almost you could call it an art form that they developed but founded beyond the false sky, beyond Teyvat. Rhine-Daughter, the alchemist Gold, one of the 5 sinners, is the most renowned and the only individual we've ever heard of that mastered this art. Albedo is getting damn close, which is why people keep a close eye on him. But that is the difference between the Crimson Moon and the Eclipse Dynasty. The Eclipse Dynasty dabbled more with technology, ruin mecha. All of these technologies gathered from outside of Teyvat. That is why Khaenri'ah was a much more advanced civilization and advanced rapidly through alchemy and technology, and every other nation was worlds behind, because Khaenri'ah was technically getting alien technology from literally beyond this world, bringing it back and studying it, mastering it. Like the Heavenly Principle said, the irrigation of mankind. No wonder they didn't need an Archon for that nation, but this is also dangerous. And like I said, Khaenri'ah had a lot of Germanic references. All of the characters have German names, along with Nibelung. And who is Nibelung again? Oh yes, the Dragon King that left Teyvat when the Primordial One usurped them. Celestia was established, the 4 Shades created. Nibelung came back with forbidden knowledge and abyssal corruption and reignited the war. And we know that Nibelung died in this process. But I really do believe Nibelung to be playing a big part in Khaenri'ah's history and manipulating them from day one. I think he's a big reason as to how Khaenri'ah was ever made aware of all of this forbidden knowledge and outworldly technologies. Khaenri'ah literally has a squad named the Black Serpent Knights, Royal Guards of Khaenri'ah, and we see a Black Serpent in the Battle Pass trailer. The same trailer that Venti says is our journey, where our abyssal sibling is corrupted by the Kingdom of Darkness, where it shows a black serpent. We know that dragons have very serpenty-like features in this game in a lot of scenarios. And the word Albric, which is a very prominent and important clan within Khaenri'ah, we've heard this name, that's Kaya's last name, along with Clothar and Calibar. It's a German name which means ruler of supernatural beings. In German legend, Albric was a dwarf that guarded the Nibelung treasure. Interesting. As we see this little pearl in the trailer. Now I promise this is going to make sense how this connects with Capitano. But remember that item we got after the Sumeru quest from Nahida, the silver twig from Irminsul? That item explains how there was a sage hanging upside down on a tree that had acquired the knowledge of how to inscribe ruins and control sacred words. And what followed was the kingdoms established along the tree's roots, gaining a glimpse into the secrets of the cosmos beyond the false sky. Remember how I said earlier in the video that the Crimson Moon dynasty is like the oldest records we have of Khaenri'ah, which was established by a sage? And King Irmin is directly named after Irminsul. And this whole hanging from the tree is a direct Odin reference, but also the difference is Odin was missing his right eye, while King Irmin, being a reference of Odin, was missing his left eye. And wouldn't you know it, look in the Battle Pass trailer. Look at the snake at the very last minute, his left eye, just like King Irmin. You can't make this stuff up.
Coincidence? I think not!
And the Crimson Moon Dynasty, its entire establishment after the War of Vengeance, the Great War in the Heavens, trying to summon outwardly help as orphans, and trying to cultivate Khaenri'ah to defy this world. Sounds a lot like Nibelung. either being King Ermin or manipulating this person to become the king of Khaenri'ah, a nation that would ultimately go head-to-head with Celestia, continuing the War of Vengeance through the Cataclysm. It gets even more interesting because the Five Sinners of Khaenri'ah went up against an individual called the Vinster King, the Five Sinners being the best of their peers according to Dainsleif. They worked together, and they could have stopped the Vinster King from rocking the consciousness of Teyvat, but apparently they could not resist the call of the Abyss. So they ended up going their separate ways, and divided amongst themselves a power that could destroy this world, and became the Five Sinners officially. And the Albrics are interesting in their own right because they kinda came out of nowhere. The first known Albric clan member in Khaenri'ah's entire history was during the Crimson Moon era, with Parinari. Someone simply named Albric was the commander of half the knights in Khaenri'ah and was considered one of the 4 strongest people in Khaenri'ah, period. Now what does this have to do with Capitano? Well, bear with me. Because the Albric clan would expand rapidly within Khaenri'ah and its influence, being one of the more predominant families in that entire nation, existing right up into the end of the Eclipse dynasty and the Cataclysm, known for producing leaders of Khaenri'ah and its knights. Now this is one popular theory going around right now. We'll explore it, but I don't necessarily think it's the right one. There is an individual within Khaenri'ah named Antfortas, who is also an Albric. He was a substitute leader of Khaenri'ah when King Ermin was unable to rule for unknown reasons. We are unsure exactly why the Five Sinners did what they did, destroying and abandoning their own nation, leaving them to get crushed by the Abyss and sandwiched with the Heavenly Principles. I'm sure this has a lot to do with defying this world and its rules, its fate, and its false sky. But Antfortas was a predominant knight and marshal and a leader within Khaenri'ah. He declared himself Marshal Regent to lead in King Ermin's absence, and led the effort to take Khaenri'ah survivors above ground into Sumeru. It is also stated that Antfortas was a great commander and warrior and commanded a ton of loyalty from his subordinates, which does fit the captain's description. So a lot of people are suggesting that the captain might actually be this individual. But I really don't think so, because they went out of their way to tell us the captain went right to Natlan after. I think people are on the right track with this one, but just not quite there. Before he wore the mask, the captain was stated to be a tall man with a large build, which we can see. He has very dark glowing blue eyes and long black hair, something we can also see consistent with all of the Albric clan members. They all have blue eyes, and it's said that they produce some of the most legendary knights in Khaenri'ah's history. So is it possible that the captain is an Albric, maybe Kaya's great uncle perhaps? I mean, it's very likely that he was from that clan, maybe not as high ranking up as somebody like Piero or Dainsleif within Khaenri'ah's hierarchy, but high enough that it'd be one of the greatest knights in that nation, somebody that Piero would know when starting to found the Fatui Harbingers, and somebody he would definitely want to recruit, seeing as that he would be the best suited for this, being not only immensely powerful but level-headed, and somebody he can trust to take the lead in the field, and would know the stakes are high. The captain would know firsthand what they're up against: the false sky, the abyss, and the gods of Celestia, the rules, the status quo they're trying to break. But remember how we mentioned the Black Serpents? What are the Black Serpents within Khaenri'ah? Back in their heyday, they were knights of the realm and carried significant status, but the long curse of immortality has robbed them of their reason and memory. Now all that remains within the armor is the will to fight for something or someone. Depending on how much wear and tear they have undergone, they are kind of referred to as shadowy husks of what they once were. But they were elite knights of the Khaenri'ah Royal Guard. A good handful of them even served under Dainsleif himself, being the Twilight Sword. Now it's clear as day you can see somewhat of a connection here, seen as that the captain has a very black snake dragon-like scales and aesthetic. Like the Black Serpent Knights, he's fully covered and somewhat as a husk of what he once was, both in strength and appearance, like he told us. He literally told us that. A lot of people thought he might be a dragon. Well, I think that entire nation was modeled after the dragon, the original king of Teyvat, to defy Celestia once more. There's so many dragon references within Khaenri'ah, not just the captain and his aesthetic. Even Ryan Daughter creates dragons and has a dragon Easter egg in the Hexen Circle trailer. Like, it's all over the place. And if you kind of just look at all this in a vacuum, the captain's immense power. His power clearly is a bit outworldly. Same with Dainsleif and all the individuals with Khaenri'ah, the Five Sinners, Skirk and Child, Sertalugi. The list goes on and on. But it seems like this entire nation from the get-go has been manipulated by the serpent-like Nibelung. After being defeated a second time, bringing the Abyss here, the War of Vengeance that shattered Celestia and almost ended Teyvat entirely, and severely weakened the heavenly principles. This might not only explain the false sky, but the Cataclysm might be Nibelung's third attempt to try to take down Celestia the Usurpers, but this time, either in a weakened state after being defeated, or reincarnated like the Dragon Sovereigns and the Dragons do. Nevertheless, not the original Dragon Sovereign of Hydro. Maybe he was going to manipulate humanity this time, and Khaenri'ah, a nation known for not having a god, had one all along. Only it was the Dragon King. And everything from the get-go, the Crimson Moon, the Eclipse Dynasty, to being two lunar type events that give Khaenri'ahns immense power, probably the remains of the dead Moon Sisters that have perished, that power being harnessed beyond the false sky. Khaenri'ah gaining outworldly technologies, science, art of Kemia, the Abyss, the creations, the Five Sinners, everything might be his doing to keep pushing Celestia to the brink, which might explain the captain's not only aesthetic, but also where he gets this incredible power, and his potential lineage being connected to the Albricks in some way. Because like I already said, the Albricks were the most predominant clan in all of Khaenri'ah and produced the most renowned knights in its entire history. Paraneri was also known to be Paraneri the Undefeated. Maybe he could be from that family lineage as well. But going by his color scheme, his dragon slash black serpent-y aesthetic, it's safe to assume that because the Black Serpents were held in such high regard, he might be just the Black Serpent Knight, the original, the most powerful, the Omega version of the Black Serpents, protectors of Khaenri'ah and high-ranking knights within the realm, but not necessarily high-ranking enough to be like on the same playing field as Dainsleif, which would make sense going by his voice line saying that he knew him by name, but didn't exactly know him on a personal level. He might have been a rank below the Twilight Sword, but also knew about the Prince, and this would also put him high enough rank to feel the burden on his shoulders to keep the nation safe. Also, the fact that the Black Serpent Knights are completely covered in armor head to toe and are regarded as empty husks of what they once were. The captain is quite literally been described to be the exact same thing. His flesh is rotting, his power is not even remotely what it once was. He's a shell of his former self. He could have been the one that created the regiment of the Black Serpent Knights to begin with, all being modeled after the true ruler of Khaenri'ah, King Irmin / Nibelung. But something else he has in common with Dainsleif besides their draconic-like features that both of them have, but they both feel they are responsible from preventing this catastrophe. Dainsleif is the sibling of one of the Five Sinners. He's connected with them and knows them, but they both feel like it was their burden to try to stop it and they couldn't. No matter how powerful they were, they couldn't stop the rift of unlimited monsters out of the Abyss, the Endless Abyss, and the Heavenly Principles. It was just too much. Again, like I said, picture what happened in Natlan's War times 100. And in every nation simultaneously. Now, off of everything we've heard him say and what we can speculate on, I'd say that the captain was a very high-ranking member of the Royal Guards and a commander of his own squad or special forces within Khaenri'ah, and obviously would have been in contact with Piero. And if he was just some field lieutenant, there's no way he would feel this responsible for Khaenri'ah and what had happened and bear that on his shoulders like he should have stopped it, unless he was incredibly high ranking up. Imagine him using his full strength 500 years ago. He is not your average commander. Albricks and Nibelung are connected. There's no doubt about it. And everything about the captain points towards this. Could be Kaya's great-great-uncle, great-great-grandfather, Because make no mistake, there's no coincidence that Kaya just ended up in Mondstadt at Krepus's house no less, Diluc's father, who also had connections with the Fatui Harbingers, and Mondstadt and Conria being the two nations that have German references. No coincidences here, but do I actually think that the captain is Anfortas, who ended up in Sumeru, a legendary Albric knight from Conria? I actually don't. I think he has a similar story, but only this Albric ended up in Natlan, and somehow found himself making a deal with Death, Ranova. I know I got it right this time, come on. There, I got it right this time, guys. Ranova. And as for why the captain's doing this and what his endgame is, I'm not 100% sure. But the game goes out of its way to tell us this line. Her Majesty the Tsaritsa, the Cryo Archon, allows every Harbinger the freedom to pursue the meaning of their existence. When the time comes, that freedom can take precedence over her orders. That was added there specifically. Now what I think this means is that the captain will try to save the Pyro Archon. Since we know the Pyro Archon is going to be playable, the captain has an insanely tall male model, taller than any playable character. He's dealing with death and was sent on his journey. And let's be honest, out of everyone you've met, who has more honor and would do something so bold as to take the place of the Pyro Archon as somebody that has to make the payment of death? And they certainly did not try to hide the fact that Mawika has earned the respect of the captain. If he feels this is the best way for the nation to survive, then I have no doubt in my mind he would do this without hesitation. They also made a point to tell us that his flesh is rotting and he's a shell of what he was. Maybe he's ready to die, and this kills two birds with one stone. He gets to save the Pyro Archon, who he now respects. The Pyro Archon ended up having the better plan and solution to the problem. The captain admitted that his solution was wrong. And 3, he can finally die. He's been whittling away for 500 years. If he can lift his own immortality while saving the nation's Archon, that obviously he feels deserves it, I don't see why he wouldn't do this. The captain has also been proven on many occasions recently to not be a schemer and a plotter. He's a straight shooter. If he had plans to do some shady shit and deceive Mawika, he would have done that already 20 times over, because he could have overpowered her long before 5.1 came around. She was in a weakened state. He did not want to take advantage of this. As for why his flesh rots, that I'm not sure. It might have something to do with his bloodline. Maybe he's not as pure of a Conrian as he thought. Maybe it affects him in a weird way because he lacks that pure bloodline. We know the Albrics go all the way back to the Crimson Moon Dynasty, where they were taken orphans from out of this world. Maybe their original ancestry is not even from Teyvat. And unlike the more high-ranking and royal Albrics, he's a little bit down the family line. Either that, or it's his deal with death, or his abyssal exposure that might be aging him and might be affecting his immortality a little bit differently. Maybe being on the front lines and fighting for so long and being exposed to the abyss much more aggressively has taken its toll on him. It's really hard to say exactly why he deteriorates faster than the other Conrians. We don't know where the Albrics actually came from before the Crimson Moon era, or where all of these outworldly orphans actually came from either. He could be a descendant of any of them. He could come from any of their family lineages, which would make his curse a little bit obscure, unless the other Conrians just found a way to stop it and he didn't. Like, it'd be a little weird if Piero, who's his direct colleague, just refuses to share this secret with him so he can actually keep his body intact. That would be a dick move. That just doesn't make any sense. But to summarize this video, I believe the captain to be an incredibly high-ranking knight and commander within Conria and its forces, probably part of the Albric family, served indirectly as a peer to Dainsleif, both carrying a similar burden, but also commanding the respect of their soldiers, and now has made it his primary mission to save Natlan, but also serve the Tsaritsa and Piero. Piero being somebody who tried to warn Conria, but they would not listen. He was not exceptional enough among his peers, and his nation suffered the wrath of the heavenly principles. He wants to break the system, break the cycle, seize authority from the gods, free everybody from Irminsul and the False Sky, and bring everyone back to the original world of Teyvat. The only problem is when they do get back to that old world, will it be actually worse off than it is right now? Is the shattered remains of Celestia still heavily corrupted by the abyss that Nibelung brought here? Is this Nibelung's ultimate plan to manipulate everyone through Khaenri'ah, manipulating Khaenri'ah from the beginning? And because we know the captain lost his nation from the abyss and the heavens, is his ultimate war with both of them? But first and foremost, to prevent Natlan to suffer the same fate as his home nation did long ago. Let me know what you think in the comments. And I also want to do a deep dive into both Natlan, its entire history, as well as the tribes. I'll probably wait till we get more tribes released to do that video, but I also want to do a deep dive into Khaenri'ah, its history, go into more detail on the two dynasties, as well as the Five Sinners, how it's connected to the Dragon King Nibelung, all of the references. I do want to make a video on that. It'll take some time to prepare because there's a lot of lore and research to go over. But let me know what you think of those in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. But thank you so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Despite me having my doubts, I do cross my fingers that the captain is playable. So I would be super sad if they didn't make him playable. But if they don't, I at least hope they have an amazing story and wrap his story up really well. That is all I can ask for. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. And as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.